So tonight we've got the great pleasure to welcome Katie Berry, who's the Communications and Engagement Officer for the Scottish Wildlife Trust Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels. But before we start on that, I'm going to hand over to Jill Hatcher, who also works for the Trust, and she's going to give us a little bit of some home housekeeping rules. Over to you, Jill.
Hey, hi everyone, I'm Jill. Just a few little pointers before we start tonight's webinar. So first of all, just to let you know that it is being recorded so that people that couldn't make it can watch it later online. But because it's a webinar, the only people that are going to appear on screen will be the people you see just now, the three of us. Like Nick said, you can use the chat to say hello, say where you've come from today, if you've got any comments, things like that. But if you've got questions for Katie, if you could put them in the Q&A panel instead. And if you look there, you can also upvote questions. So if you see a question that someone else has asked and you think that's a really good question, I want to know the answer to that too, you can upvote it and then we can see which ones are the most popular. Hopefully we'll get through everyone's questions, but if we don't, that'll kind of help us decide. Another thing I should say about the chat and Q&A is please don't post any links in them. And if you see some links which haven't been posted by anybody you see on screen, please don't click on them either because we can't be sure that they're safe to click on. And last of all, if you would like to have closed captions tonight, there is that option at the bottom of Zoom. So if you just toggle on closed captions, you'll get live subtitling as well, if that's what you'd like to have. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jill. Do you think shall we get started or shall we wait a few more minutes for other participants?
I think we're okay to get started.
Okay, great, cool. So good evening again, everybody, and welcome to tonight's talk. It's a great pleasure to welcome Katie here to give us a talk on this enigmatic species that is the red squirrel. Very much looking forward to hearing all the activities that are going on by this coalition of partnerships to save the Scottish red squirrel around Scotland. So that's really great. But before I leave the floor to Katie, I'm going to say a few words about her and introduce her a little bit. So Katie began her squirrel journey as the Scottish Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels as an administrator. She joined the team in March 2020, just before the first COVID-19 lockdown. Before that, she worked with the National Trust for Scotland for 2 years. And in November 2022, she became the Communications and Engagement Officer for the team, having in the meantime seconded for 2 months to Osprey Watch at the Scottish Wildlife Trust Loch of the Lowes Reserve and completing an HNC in Wildlife and Conservation Management at SRUC. Katie loves spreading the word about the excellent work the project is undertaking. She maintains a website, gives talks, publishes blogs and press releases, and she sends out the SSRS's quarterly newsletter, which I'm sure she'll encourage you to sign up to. And she coordinates the annual Great Scottish Squirrel Survey and manages the programme's social media pages. So a big welcome, Katie. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And over to you.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks for that introduction. Always very funny hearing about yourself in that way, but thank you very much. It's very nice of you. And welcome to everybody that's joining us. I understand we have people from all over the world, so thank you so much for staying up late or getting up early or joining us in the middle of your days, wherever you are. So today I'm going to be giving a bit of a talk about Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels, which is a partnership project led by the Scottish Wildlife Trust. And we are working very hard to save the red squirrel in Scotland, which is Scotland's only native species of squirrel. So yeah, let's find out all about the red squirrel and the dangers that it faces and what we're doing to try and protect it. So I'll just take you on. So this is all about red squirrels. So red squirrels are the UK's only native squirrel species. They actually have a wide global range throughout Europe, Russia and northern China. There are around 220,000, this is very much an estimate number, remaining in Scotland, which is about 80% of the UK's total population of red squirrels. So within the UK, Scotland has about 80% of those squirrels that are remaining. Their colour can vary very widely from a kind of sandy orange colour to a deep brown, and they even sometimes can look grey in colour. In winter, they often have these iconic ear tufts, which you can see on the screen. They live to around 4 years in the wild, but they can live for up to 7 in captivity. They weigh between 270 and 300 grams, roughly. One very surprising thing about them is that they don't hibernate at all. So lots of people think that they do, but actually in winter, they just spend a lot more time sleeping and a bit less time out and about, which I can definitely identify with as the weather has got colder in Scotland in the last couple of days. They give birth to around 1 or 2 litters per year of 3 to 5 kits. That's what we call baby red squirrels. Their breeding periods are, the first one is sort of January to March time, and the second one is in June and July. They're omnivores, which means they can eat all kinds of different things, but they are cone specialists. So the classic feeding signs that you might find are discarded remains of kind of stripped cones of pine or other conifer species of trees, cones on the ground as you're walking along. They also eat lots of other tree nuts, seeds. They will also eat buds, flowers, eggs, fruits, and even mushrooms sometimes. So they eat a wide variety of things. Their nests are called drays, and they're high up in the canopy. It's most common to find red squirrels in conifer habitats, but actually they will inhabit deciduous or broadleaf woodland as long as there are not any grey squirrels present. And we'll come on to a bit more of that later. So the main threats. So the red squirrel population in the UK has been, and in Scotland has in general been declining. As I said, there are only around 220,000 in Scotland, about 80% of the UK total. It's hard to say what there would have been in the past, but there's various different figures, 2.5 million, 3.5 million. It's hard to say exactly, but now there's only around 220,000 left. They're a protected species in the UK under the Schedules 5 and 6 of the 1981 Wildlife and Countryside Act, which means that it's an offence to kill or to injure them or to damage or disturb any other drays or other structures that they're using for shelter or for nesting. The main threats to red squirrels are grey squirrels, more on that later, squirrel pox virus, habitat loss, timber harvesting and woodland clearance, severe winters, traffic accidents, pet predation, and natural predation. Grey squirrels. Grey squirrels is the only other species of squirrels we have in the UK. It's actually not native to the UK at all. It's native to the USA and Canada. It was first introduced to the UK in the 1870s, and the first release dates that we know about in Scotland were in sorry, that's a typo, 1882, Argyll, 1919, Fife, sometime in Edinburgh, we're not exactly sure when, and 1971 in Aberdeen. But there were several other releases, but those are the kind of main ones. They have very similar breeding patterns to reds, although they sometimes can breed throughout the year, depending on the weather and the food sources available. They prefer, in general, broadleaf woodland, and they do very well in the UK's broadleaf woodland areas. They can always be identified by the white halo tail around the edges of their tail, which you can see in that image there. So this kind of white, very white fringe around the edge of their tail. They never have ear tufts, and they weigh a bit bigger than red squirrels, so around 550 to 650 grams. So this is a bit of a comparison between the two when you're trying to tell them apart. It sometimes can be very difficult because of the color variations in both of them. But you can see on the left, that's the red squirrel, and it has a much smaller, more slender body. The face shape also is a little bit more petite, a bit smaller, a bit more pointy. And in general, they will have that chestnut coat, and in the winter especially, these very distinctive ear tufts, which everybody loves them for. The grey squirrel on the right has a larger, heavier body, small ears with no tufts, and a bit of a broader, kind of rounder face, and always this white fringe of hair, or halo, as we call it, around the tail. So, but beware variations. So it can be sometimes tricky to tell the two different species apart, especially if it's dark or you only get a glimpse. So you can see here, top left, very dark coloured red squirrels. So often in the winter, those two top pictures actually show their darker fur that they can sometimes grow in as part of their winter coat. Sometimes they don't have ear tufts, so you can see that in the bottom middle. And sometimes grey squirrels, which is on the right-hand side, can look very reddish in colour. So you can see that tail looks very red, except for that white halo around the tail, which is always present. So just to say, if you're ever out and about in the UK, if you're based in the UK and you're looking and you're trying to tell which species you're seeing, hopefully that's helpful to you. So a little bit more about the main threats to red squirrels. Just before we come on to that, a little bit of context for you in terms of the work that we're doing within its kind of wider global significance. So the main threat to red squirrels, as we briefly touched upon, is invasive non-native grey squirrels. And actually, invasive non-native species have been classified as one of the top 5 or 7 causes of global biodiversity loss by the, and this is a very long name, so please excuse it, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, also called IPBES. So in 2019, they published a global assessment report on biodiversity crisis that is occurring very sadly around the world, and they identified these 5 main drivers on the left. So the changing use of land and sea, so that could be building or changing uses of woodlands or forestry, the direct exploitation of organisms, so things such as hunting and fishing, or overfishing, I should say, climate change, which we all know about, pollution, and invasive non-native species. So invasive non-native species sit within that kind of those 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss worldwide. And you can see here 3 other examples that we have in Scotland. We've got Himalayan balsam on the left, American mink in the middle, which is has devastating effects, as some of you may know, for native songbird populations, and Rhododendron ponticum on the right, which again, some of you may be familiar with, outcompetes lots of our native flora in our native broadleaf forests. So 3 other examples there. So why are grey squirrels and inns an invasive non-native species? It's important to say that not all introduced species are invasive. So invasive species generally tend to be about 10% of introduced species. So we have all kinds of species of flora and fauna from around the world in the UK, as will be the same in lots of other countries. And it's in general in the UK, it's about 10%. So it's only those which have some kind of detrimental impact on our native biodiversity. So grey squirrels, so they are much larger than reds, and they, for that reason, they need to ingest more food than reds do. So they have a higher kind of drive to eat more of the native food that's available. They have a higher reproductive rate. So as said earlier, they can reproduce in warmer winters. And until the last couple of days here in Scotland, it had been an exceptionally warm autumn. And we were getting reports of grey squirrels reproducing potentially for a 3rd time. They build up fat reserves far more easily than red squirrels do, so it makes it easier for them to survive through the winter. Crucially, they digest acorns and hazelnuts much more efficiently and earlier in the season. So because of what we think is a more diverse gut microbiome, they can ingest this food that has high levels of tannins in it when it's first ripening. That is, those levels of tannins are poisonous to reds, so reds won't touch it, but greys can. So often they'll come into an area and eat a lot of that food source, leaving none left for the red squirrels when they're ready to eat it a couple of weeks later. They live at much higher densities, so they put greater pressure on that available food source. And because of all these reasons, they have a very competitive advantage in broadleaf woodlands and urban areas in particular in the UK. Alongside this, they carry the squirrelpox virus, which doesn't affect them, but is fatal to around 90 to 95% of red squirrels. So there's no impact on the grey squirrels at all, but it will kill 90 to 95% of any red squirrel that catches it within about 2 weeks. So it's really, really detrimental to them. So overall, this means that they outcompete reds for food and living space, and it makes it very hard for them to survive. Just as a warning, on the next slide, there is a very sad, slightly gruesome photo of a red squirrel suffering with squirrelpox. So if you're squeamish at all, you might want to close your eyes. So this is a red squirrel that is suffering from squirrelpox virus. And as you can see, it's extremely detrimental to them. So it's fatal for red squirrels, as I said. It starts with lesions around the eyes and eventually causes blindness. And it also means that they get sores on their mouth, their feet, their ears, their genitalia. And this means they become malnourished and disorientated. And yeah, most of them die within about 2 weeks of catching it. And it can spread very quickly throughout a population. At the moment, there's no vaccine or treatment available for it at all. As said, it's carried and spread by grey squirrels. The first recording that we had of a grey squirrel that had it. So it's estimated that in the UK, about 60% of grey squirrels are carrying it in some form or another. So the first case here was of a grey squirrel carrying the virus was detected in 2005. The first red death and red outbreak was in Lockerbie in 2007. So this is in the Scottish borders. And the first death of a red squirrel north of the kind of urban area of Scotland, just north of the kind of Glasgow, Edinburgh urban belt, was actually in April of this year in Dunfermline and Fife. So that was the first confirmed death that we've had of a red squirrel north of Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders. At the moment, grey squirrel control is the only mitigation measure for this disease. So it's been shown through research that if grey squirrel densities are really low, that they have a reduced rate of transfer and they can't sustain circulating the virus. So the lower the density, the less likely it is to spread between them and then onto the native red squirrel populations. So this just gives you a bit of a picture of the history of grey and red squirrels and their relationship in the UK over time. So on the very left there, you can see the distributions in 1945. So the red is where red squirrels were found, the grey is where grey squirrels were found, and the orange is where both species were found. The green is where there were no species of either squirrel. So you can see in 1945, it's largely in the home counties, and that kind of like central eastern part of England that grey squirrels were found, but that those red squirrel populations were starting to reduce. And then you can see a huge change 55 years later in the middle in the year 2000. Grey squirrels are largely the dominant species in the south middle of England and in Wales, and red squirrels are holding on in northern England and in Scotland. And then you can see 2010 on the right. And again, a similar picture, but with red squirrel only areas reducing even further. There is a new map out very recently. I think it came out on Monday. Just haven't had time to input into this presentation yet. So that picture has changed a bit since then, especially in Ireland. There's been some significant changes. Red squirrels have really bounced back in Ireland in a very positive way due to pine marten recovery. A little bit more on that later. And so just to be aware that 2010 map is a little bit out of date, but it gives you a good idea of the progression there. The other thing that grey squirrels do is they also practice bark stripping on trees, often targeting young broadleaf trees. Species most impacted include oak, beech, hornbeam, and sweet chestnut. The high grey squirrel population densities result in severe woodland damage in lots of parts of the UK. And this can impact our timber industry and the ecological health of our native woodlands. Young broadleaf trees have been unable to replace aging broadleafs in certain areas of the UK due to excessive bark stripping. And this we know is very important for our woodland recovery. At the moment, lots of our woodlands have become quite old and we need to regenerate them. So grey squirrels can have a detrimental impact on some of this hard work that is being undertaken. So the estimates of cost of grey squirrel damage to trees in England and Wales is estimated to be about £37 million per year. We don't have a figure for Scotland, but that gives you some research that was done in recent years that gives you a good idea of the likely impact, mostly due to the lost timber value of forestry, reduced carbon capture, the damage mitigation that you have to put in place, and trees to replace those that have died due to bark stripping. It's important to say that red squirrels will also bark strip as well, but the impact that they have is far less because of the lower densities that they live at and their much smaller size. Yes. So that's all quite depressing. So now on to the good news. This is the history of red squirrel conservation in Scotland. There's a lot of info here, but I know the talk is being recorded, so you can always come back and pause on this page if you'd like to look at it in further detail. I'm not going to go through every single point, but I will go through some of the key ones. So 1998, this is when the first Scottish strategy for red squirrel conservation was published. And this was came together through the Scottish Squirrel Group, which was convened by Nature Scott, at that time Scottish Natural Heritage. And this was the first plan for how to protect red squirrels in Scotland. So it's the first time that we were kind of really realizing that there was a big problem, and putting some kind of strategy for saving them into place. In 2009, Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels, which is the project that I currently work for, was launched by the Scottish Wildlife Trust and its partners. Up until then, there were various other organisations doing really fantastic work, but this was when SSRS was first set up. In 2015, this is when the first priority areas for red squirrel conservation were identified. These are kind of, as they suggest, these are very key areas for saving red squirrels in Scotland. And actually, this was also when the current strategy, 10-year strategy for red squirrel conservation was written. It's 10 years old, so due to expire next year. In 2018, we launched our community hub, which is a really key way of gathering data about red and grey squirrels in Scotland. And it's a kind of centralised resource for anybody that's undertaking grey squirrel control, or anybody that sites or is doing surveying of any sort of both squirrel species. And it's really important for gathering information and getting as clear a picture as we can about the work that's being done and what needs to happen in the future. So we're currently in a 2-year phase. SSRS has had several different phases, but we're currently in a 2-year funded phase, and we are funded largely by the Nature Restoration Fund, which is administered by the Scottish Government, by Nature Scott on behalf of the Scottish Government. And they have funded us for 2 years of work, which will end in March of 2026. And you can see all of the partners that have signed on as part of this 2-year phase. So we have the Scottish Wildlife Trust leading, we have Nature Scott, which is Scotland's nature agency. We have Scottish Forestry and Forestry and Land Scotland. Those are both also statutory bodies for forestry in Scotland. We have the RSPB Scotland, which is another big conservation charity. Scottish Land and Estates, which help to represent estate and landowners involved in the project. Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park. So we work in one of Scotland's two. Currently, Scotland has 2 national parks, so we work in one of them. And Aberdeen City Council, who are really crucial to some of our work in the northeast of Scotland. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the priority areas that we've identified red squirrels are most at risk. So we have 3 priority areas, and I'm going to talk through the work that we're doing in each of them. So the first area is northeast Scotland. So I'm aware that some folk on this call might not be familiar with Scotland, so apologies that I don't have a slightly wider view. But what you're seeing there, that kind of purple patch, is Aberdeen City, which is in the northeast of Scotland. And Aberdeen City is Scotland's 3rd largest city. And you can see there on that map on the left, we have the red colour shows where red squirrels are, and the purple colour shows where red and grey squirrels are. And the kind of white dashed lines is sort of our priority project area where we are working up there at the moment. So this population actually resulted from a single introduction in 1971. And it was about 20 squirrels that were accidentally released. They were brought up to be in a zoo, and they escaped on their first night. And quickly grew into a population of about 10,000 or more grey squirrels. And they're completely isolated from the rest of the UK. They're not joined on to any other grey squirrel populations. So for that reason, we kind of call them an island species because of the nature of that. So in recent years, we've reduced grey squirrel numbers significantly, and we're actually aiming to eradicate grey squirrels completely from this area using new and innovative techniques. So yeah, at the time when we began our work in 2009, grey squirrels had almost entirely replaced reds within Aberdeen City. And they were starting to be found in a much wider area than what's currently shown. way up into Aberdeenshire via the rivers Dee and Don, which you can see there on the map. And this meant that they were posing a significant threat to the UK's core red-only squirrel population, which is in the Highlands. So yeah, most of the red squirrels in Scotland, about 80%, are found within the Highlands itself. And the Scottish Highlands have got no grey squirrels in them. So this was really posing a threat to some of those key populations. So for nearly 10 years, SSRS staff have been carrying out traditional trapping and humane dispatch of grey squirrels in this area. And to date, we have controlled about 10,000 grey squirrels. And we have a now record low detections and captures. So this year so far, we've only had 15 detections of grey squirrels in total in the city, which is incredible really from a population of 10,000 originally. So we've had 7 samples taken from feeder boxes where we put little sticky tabs on the underneath of the lids of feeder boxes, and squirrels or any other animal accessing the food leaves a little hair sample when they open the lid. So we've got hundreds of feeder boxes throughout the city. We've only had 7 so far this year that have come back with grey squirrel hairs on them. We've had 8 public sightings, so the members of the public can submit sightings to us at any time of both species. We've only had 8 so far this year of grey squirrels in Aberdeen, and we've only had 4 captures in almost 12 months. So what that shows really is the extreme low density that we're now working with. It's fantastic news, and we're really happy to have achieved such a great thing. It's going to allow red squirrels to revive in this part of Scotland, and of course it's protecting those core island species. If we are successful at eradicating in Aberdeen, it will be the first mainland and first urban eradication of an invasive species of mammal worldwide, actually. So I know it says grey squirrels there, but we think it's going to be the first urban eradication of a mammal worldwide on a mainland. Invasive species eradications generally tend to work very well in island situations, but very hard to do on a mainland. So yeah, hopefully that gives a good overview of what's been happening in Aberdeen. It does mean that our work now is becomes much more difficult. As the density gets really, really low, it becomes even harder to find those remaining populations. And we know that just 20 caused a population of 10,000 within kind of a couple of decades. So we really want to make sure that all the hard work that we've put in doesn't go to waste, and that doesn't happen again. This map here shows you an indication. This is Aberdeen City that you can see, and this shows you the kind of presence detection of grey squirrels over time. So we've got 2009 on the left, 2017, 2021, and then on the right, 2024. So we've seen in the last 3 years, we've seen a dramatic drop from the work that we've been doing. And we think that's maybe because through having a much lower population, we've kind of interrupted some kind of breeding patterns with females less likely to mate as the densities have got so low. They're less likely to kind of come into utero and for those mating patterns to happen. So we think that might be why. But yeah, it's really incredible to see the difference there over time. And then this is showing red squirrel detections in the same area for the same years. So you can see in 2009, very rare to find them in Aberdeen City at all. And by 2017, recovering, and 2021 and 2024, even more. And they're now found within parks and gardens of Aberdeen City, right into the very centre of Aberdeen. So that's really incredible. And it also kind of demystifies a bit of a misconception, which is that grey squirrels can survive in urban environments and red squirrels can't. And actually that's not true. We're seeing red squirrels in Aberdeen City, which is Scotland's 3rd largest urban area, and actually red squirrels can survive in urban areas as long as grey squirrels aren't present. So it's not really the urbanization. Of course, it it changes the makeup of the landscape, but red squirrels can still survive in those areas. This is a little shot of our feeder box locations. This is actually from 2023, so apologies, it's slightly out of date, but so there'll be a fair few more now because we've really upped our feeder box monitoring this year. So this is where we put feeder boxes out. We have these sticky tabs on the underside of the lids to try and detect which squirrels are present in which place. So we've really been putting a huge, as the grey squirrel population has got really low in Aberdeen, we've been putting in a huge amount of effort to try and make those feeder box locations as extensive as possible to sort of find this sort of needle in the haystack type thing. So this year so far, this figure I got from one of our project officers up there today, we've carried out 7,212 feeder box checks, which is, that's 7,212 times a person has gone and checked a feeder box and analysed a hair sample. So that is a huge amount of work. And we have, I don't know how many exact volunteers we have in Aberdeen now, but certainly 100 or more that are doing incredible work for us and checking those feeder boxes and sending us in the hair samples. So we're incredibly grateful to local people in Aberdeen for coming out and volunteering with us in this way, and it really does make a huge difference to the work that we're doing. And here are a few images that just show you what I'm talking about. So you can see on the left there one of our feeder boxes with my colleague Felix just sticking the sticky pad onto the underside of the lid. And then you can see an example of what that looks like in the middle. And then on the right, my colleague Marlo looking at those through a microscope to detect which squirrel species they are seeing. So that just shows you a little bit about that work. So on to our second priority area. So this is the Highland Line in Scotland. So our aim here is to maintain the Highland Line, but ultimately to try and move it southwards. So I'll explain a little bit about what it is. So the Highland Line is a geographical boundary fault line, natural boundary fault line that separates out Scotland's lowlands and its highlands, broadly speaking. So this is really, the highlands start above it and the lowlands are on it and below it. And this is at the moment the furthest northerly point that grey squirrels have reached in Scotland. So you can see there, the purple colour is where both species are found, the red colour is where red squirrels only are found, and the blue colour, which you can just see at the bottom, is where we just find grey squirrels. So we are defending that core red only population, which you can see at the top left of that image there. That's where 80% of Scotland's red squirrels reside and not threatened by greys at all. So we are defending those core populations by carrying out targeted landscape scale grey squirrel control across that Highland boundary fault line, which you can see there dashed in that white dashing colour there. So the grey squirrel population is that it does exist in that purple and blue areas is the result of incursion northwards from the core populations of grey squirrels in Scotland's central belt. So they have over time moved north from places like Edinburgh, places like Fife, up into Stirlingshire and Tayside and Angus, and little parts of Argyll over on the left there, and moving steadily northwards over periods of time. And currently the furthest northern point they've reached is the Highland boundary fault line. And without action, they could continue to spread northwards, which would threaten those healthy red-only populations of the Scottish Highlands. Over a decade, our efforts have halted them from moving further northwards and resulted in some retraction in some places of the grey squirrel population. As a result, we've seen no evidence of red squirrel decline and even some localised red squirrel recovery. In time, we hope very much to move this frontier between grey and red squirrels southwards and expand the red squirrel only areas in this part of Scotland. So we're aware that there are big populations still in places like Dundee and Perth, but in time we would like to move that line southwards so that we have less area to cover, and so those red only populations can expand even further. And there's now a long-standing agreement from the Scottish Government, from its statutory agencies, from wildlife organisations and the public that this work has to continue in the long term if we are going to protect red squirrels in Scotland. And if we don't, we would likely see, we would definitely see grey squirrel incursion into the Highlands and eventual replacement, as the rest of the UK has very sadly seen. So it's really important that we carry out and maintain this work. So this just gives you a bit of an idea of some of our trapping efforts in recent years. This This is showing you the amount of days that our traps are open and in which areas. We've had a fair amount of staffing changes in recent years within the SSRS project, but we're now up to a full team, so we really very much hope to increase and change the colour of these squares even darker. Some of this is also down to fantastic volunteer efforts. That kind of darker patch that you see in the middle of the screen around Stirling is down to some very diligent volunteers that are working very hard for the project. And if you're interested in getting involved, then we're absolutely always looking for folk local to that area in Orange in particular, but kind of outlying areas to the north and south of it as well to get involved if you're local to that area. The other thing that we're doing in the Central Lowlands is monitoring for squirrel pox. So as I said earlier, squirrel pox has only been found in big ways in Dumfries and Galloway and in the Scottish borders, but we have been monitoring its spread amongst grey squirrel populations. So this is when we test for antibodies within grey squirrels that have been dispatched to see kind of what prevalence we have of it. So since 2009, we've monitored 2,555 grey squirrels, and about 176 of those in the Central Lowlands have been positive. We've tested 47 red squirrels, so these are carcasses that people send in, typically from that they find out and about, often from road traffic accidents, or that they find in the woodlands or in their gardens. So we advise anybody that finds a carcass of a red squirrel to send it in. I can give further details on how to do that for post-mortem testing. And this, even if you think this is definitely being killed by road traffic or by a predator, we can still test and see whether squirrel pox is becoming at all more prevalent. We've only had 2 confirmed cases in the Central Lowlands so far. One was actually inconclusive. That's the one that you can see in the middle of your screen. So I should say that these dots, if they're a light color, it means they're a negative. If they're a darker color, it means they're a positive. But that one in the middle of the screen, that darker red dot, was inconclusive. It was very, very slight, the presence of squirrel pox. Whereas the one in Dunfermline, slightly further down, that was the first death that we have had of a red squirrel due to squirrel pox. And that was reported very widely in the news at the time. There's the BBC article detailing that. So we are watching that situation very, very carefully. And we would encourage anybody that's feeding squirrels in these areas, I mean, actually at all in Scotland, to regularly clean your feeders with an antiviral solution. We recommend Virkon, which you can buy online. And this will help. It's typically spread when squirrels come to close contact with each other. So yeah, we would recommend thorough cleaning and regular cleaning of feeders to help stop that spread. And we would also recommend, if you do spot a squirrel and you suspect that it might have squirrel pox, to let us know about it and to take photos if at all possible. So, yeah. This is a little bit of our work in the Central Lowlands. So you can see this is Felix checking a camera trap on the left-hand side. So we often use camera traps to opposite feeder boxes so that we can see as well as detect those hairs. And that's just a very nice photo of a red squirrel. I think at Loch Lomond. Although if anybody can tell me exactly which loch it is, then let me know. But I think it's Loch Lomond. So our third and final area. So this is the south of Scotland, which I've referenced a couple of times, but this gives you a good picture. So in that image there, again, the blue is where there's grey squirrels only. The purple is where there's both species, and the red is where there's just red squirrels. So you can see here that the situation is far more patchy and yeah, very different from those other areas of Scotland. So at the moment, our work is to support a network of 17 independent volunteer-led red squirrel groups who work to protect those remaining red squirrel populations across 10 parks or priority areas for red squirrel conservation. And those are the ones that you can see there dashed in white. And we also provide some necessary strategic professional grey squirrel control in some of those key areas. So these volunteer groups were set up in a previous phase of our project. and they now work independently, but we still can provide a certain level of support, and we still have some professional presence within the area as well. So grey squirrels here, they occur from both northern England, where there are big populations, and the central belt of Scotland. So the red squirrel populations are kind of under pressure from two sides. And they're found at much higher densities than any other project regions that we have. The red squirrel populations are more localized, more isolated, and there is always the pervasive and increasing threat of squirrel pox, which is likely present in all grey squirrel populations in South Scotland. So the main aim here is to prevent further spread of squirrel pox by keeping those grey squirrel numbers low to reduce the risk of transmission between them and reduce it spreading further northwards, although it is, we do know that it has done that. So local communities and local volunteer groups are really key to protecting the parks. Having them involved allows for this greater landscape scale coverage in the absence of professional staff, but we very much recognise that it's not self-sustaining and it's not a replacement for professional efforts. The key issue really here is around funding. We would like to see increased funding and increased support for professional efforts in the south of Scotland. But yeah, to date, staff, volunteers and participating landowner estates who can get funding to carry out grey squirrel control on their own land have controlled over 33,337 grey squirrels since 2017. But yeah, the region in general continues to face challenges of funding cycles and insufficient support resource and capacity. This is a map of those volunteer groups who work very diligently to control grey squirrels where they can, as much as they can. So you can see that they're covering most of that very southern area where the red squirrel populations are still remaining. And this gives you an idea of the trapping effort that has gone in by both volunteer groups and professional staff in the last 2 years. Yeah, I should say that this doesn't necessarily reflect all of the trapping effort. And in this area of Scotland, we also carry out some free shooting as well, which is not included in these records. So in reality, there's likely to be a little bit more going on than what you see here on this map, but this gives you an idea. So in conclusion, yeah, these are our 3 priority areas represented now in total on the map of Scotland. So yeah, the current 2015 strategy priorities, so that's this Scottish Squirrel strategy that was developed about 9 years ago, are to focus intensive efforts in those parks in the south of Scotland and prevent grey squirrels from travelling further north and colonising any areas of Scottish Highlands. So these are our operational kind of priorities over the next 2 years. So the Northeast, we're deploying novel detection and removal strategies to try and achieve eradication in that yellow area. And we're supporting this kind of intensive rapid response monitoring. So that was that map of all the monitoring squares across that area to remove any remaining grey squirrels. And then in the Highland Line area, so we're employing this strategic coordinated control of grey squirrel populations across that Highland Line control zone. And we aim to increase efforts in higher density areas, along with support and expand this kind of rapid response monitoring networks, which we've seen such success with in Aberdeen, to kind of monitor for very low density populations along the kind of northern part of the Highland Boundary Fault Line. We are also aiming to eradicate grey squirrels from the Loch Lomond Islands in the next kind of year and a half or so. So a lot of work has gone into detecting where those are and getting landowner agreements to achieve that work. And we'll be putting a plan in place to go ahead with that very soon. And we're also monitoring the spread of squirrel pox by doing that antibody testing that I was talking about. And then in the south of Scotland, it's providing that professional control of grey squirrel populations in some of the key parks with the aim of reducing those grey squirrel densities and mitigating against the impacts of squirrel pox. And then kind of finding different ways to support those community groups that are doing the grey squirrel control. And then providing kind of additional knowledge, training and support via our community hub, our kind of data repository system to those red squirrel groups in the south of Scotland. And then the new strategy for red squirrel conservation, which is currently in draft form, but will hopefully be implemented very soon, is quite similar, following on from the work that's already being done. So in the northeast, to eradicate that population of grey squirrels in Aberdeen, and to put in place monitoring efforts to make sure that in the long term we detect any remaining grey squirrels. And to isolate and deploy models for urban eradication for those high density grey squirrel populations across the East Coast corridor, so that's places like Dundee and Arbroath. And then strategic landscape program of control throughout the eastern and central lowlands, with this aim of shifting the Highland Line south. So what I should say about all of these purple points is that they're what the new strategy aims to do. So the strategy has not been finalised yet, but this is just what it's in its current draft form. This is what we hope it will set out. And it's also then to work collaboratively with the Northern England efforts to reduce grey squirrel densities. So in Northern England, there's some great work going on through some organisations and volunteer groups there. So we hope to work with them. Obviously, squirrels don't know where the country borders are. So it's very important that we work collaboratively with those efforts south of the Scottish-English border. So that's pretty much it. That's a lot of information, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of our priorities and where we're working. We work in areas where we know that we'll have a positive impact on red squirrels, and it's all very funding dependent as well. So we're working in and we're prioritizing areas for prioritizing funding efforts for areas where we know we're going to have a positive impact. So if you want to get involved, if you're based in Scotland and you would like to get involved in the work that we're doing, these are some of the ways that you can. So you can record your grey and red squirrel sightings with us, and we would really love it if as many people would do that as possible on our website. And this helps us to have a really good picture of where grey and red squirrel populations are in Scotland. So you can see up there on the top right our current map from our website. I think that was a screen grab that I took yesterday, which shows you where those populations are. Of course, it's not an exact picture because we know there will be populations in areas where humans don't go as much, that we might not get sightings of, but the more sightings we can get, the better overall picture it will give us. Cleaning feeders, as I said, with an antiviral solution such as Virkon as much as possible. You can volunteer with SSRS, or if you're in the south of Scotland, with your local Red Squirrel group. I know that the groups are often looking for people with all kinds of different skills: fundraising, community engagement, surveying, grey squirrel control, organisational roles. So if you're based in Dumfries and Galloway or the Scottish borders and you think you fall within where those groups are based, then you can get involved with them. And with SSRS, again, if you're within that kind of Aberdeen area or along the Highland Line, then we're always looking for folk to get involved with grey squirrel control. If you don't want to dispatch, this is fine. We'll often kind of offer folk to just host one of our grey squirrel traps in their garden, and then they don't have to do anything other than just check it twice a day to see whether they have anything in there. I should say that we only carry out live trapping, so we don't use kill traps at all. So it'd just be checking to see whether you've got anything in there, and if you do, calling a member of staff or a professional volunteer who would then come and deal with it. You can donate to the project if you would like to. As I said, funding is a key issue for us. So yeah, if you would like to donate, then do get in touch and we can give you those details. If you find any red squirrel carcasses when you're out and about, then please do send those in for post-mortem. Details of how to do that are on our website, or you can give us an email. I'm sure we can share what those email details are. And in general, just speak out and advocate for red squirrels in Scotland. They're a really important part of our native species, and we really, really want to see them protected and be here for future generations to enjoy. Seeing one is such a special experience, and people really love them. So yeah, please do speak out and help with the efforts to protect them. And then this is my very final slide. This is just for anybody that is interested in feeding red squirrels in their garden. So this is definitely something that we know lots of people love to do. And it's really, really special to be able to sit in your house and see them outside, and it's a very magical experience. So just a few hints and tips. So please only provide feeders in places where squirrels don't have to cross open ground or cross roads. So as high as possible and very near to their habitat. And this reduces the risk that they'll have a road traffic accident or get eaten by a predator, etc. You can use a squirrel feeder box or bird feeders. We suggest only feeding small amounts every 3 to 4 days, and that's to make sure that they don't become over-reliant on human food, just in case something happens. So that means they're still kind of self-sustaining. Regularly clean your feeders. I think I probably have said that about 5 times, but it's an important point. Provide some water as well. And then you can feed them things like hazelnuts, unsalted peanuts, sunflower seeds, but then things like antlers, apples and carrots also provide a very important source of calcium for them. And then very interestingly, and I think surprisingly to some people, they need help with feeding most in the late summertime. This is because their predominant food sources actually come into seed and fruition in the autumn. So from the autumn onwards, they're doing pretty well. They're set up for the winter time, but it's in the late summer, just before things like hazelnuts and acorns start to come out, that they need the most help and most support. So yeah, that's often a surprising fact for folk. And that's it. That's the end. Thanks very much. And yeah, looking forward to hearing any questions that anyone has.
Yes, thank you very much, Katie, for this, what I felt was a very inspiring and also encouraging, I think, talk about conservation action. So very well done to all who are involved. Those maps of Aberdeen are definitely striking. Like, just the eradication of the grey and the return of the red within the city is just fantastic. Just really, really inspiring that. There are a number of questions waiting for you, so I'll try and share and get to those straight away. I think the first one we had was around. Just bear with me a moment. What are the latest thoughts on pox virus reducing red numbers throughout Scotland? I think you've covered some of that aspect of the talk, but maybe go through those the key points relating to that.
Yeah, so we definitely know that it has a detrimental impact in the south of Scotland. We try and catch any big outbreaks as much as we can through encouraging people to report that to us or report it to their local group. And at that point, we might go in. We have a kind of protocol that we go through that those groups have access to as well. That involves encouraging local people to take down feeders for a couple of weeks, to report all sightings to us, and to go in and control any grey squirrel populations nearby. But we know that squirrel pox virus has had a detrimental impact in different parts of South Scotland, along with North England as well. At the moment in the Central Belt, we are not aware there are any outbreaks occurring. We had that one death of a red squirrel from Dunfermline, but thankfully the community and the local group there sprung into action very quickly. And didn't detect any further cases. So yeah, if you think that you have seen a poorly looking squirrel, then take some video footage, take some photos of it, and do send it in to us, and we can take a look. And if you find any carcasses, get in touch with us immediately, and we can advise you of what to do next.
Cool. Then I've got a question around where do sometimes red squirrels make their drays in roof spaces as well as trees? Do they sometimes come in and use human habitations?
Occasionally you get reports of that, very occasionally. And if so, because it's illegal to disturb their drays, unfortunately, yeah, kind of have to leave them to do it, a bit like bats. But I think it's rarer than you would expect. But yeah, very occasionally get reports of that.
And have you had any instances of red and greys interbreeding, or are they completely distinct species?
No, completely distinct species. So
Oh, great.
Sorry, that was just my colleague leaving the
Okay.
office there. Yeah, no, they're completely distinct species, so they can't interbreed at all.
And again, I think you've covered that in the talk, but there was an early question, so before you answered it, I guess, but we can maybe just saying, why were the greys released in Aberdeen in 1971? And that's something I learnt tonight. Yeah,
Yes, so an accidental release. So back in those days, people didn't realize quite how dangerous it was, and they were taken up there to be in a zoo, and within the first night had escaped. Now it's illegal to release or to keep grey squirrels in captivity at all in the UK. So you're not allowed to, if you captured them, you're not allowed to keep them, and you're not allowed to release them. So the only option for grey squirrels that are in any kind of captivity is dispatch now. But at the time that wasn't the case. So yes, very unfortunate incident in Aberdeen.
I guess that's because of their invasive nature. Is the fact that if they get out, they spread very easily. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
they're classified legally as an invasive species, and
Right.
that's why.
And one interesting one around habitat, the quality of habitat, and quite a lot of the forestry commission land seems to be mono species of trees, and with a change to multi-species trees, give the red squirrels more territory.
Interesting. Yeah. So actually, interestingly, red squirrels have been observed to do better in conifer stands, so that native or non-native. And that is because grey squirrels don't do well in that type of habitat. They need more sustenance than what conifer species can give. So grey squirrels do really well in broadleaf. So it's an interesting one. And basically what we say is that we would like to see, obviously, as a wildlife conservation organization, and growth of our native woodlands and native broadleaf species. And if you're going to do that, you have to do grey squirrel control for the red squirrel species that we want to continue surviving in the UK, but also because of the detrimental impact that grey squirrels can have on bark stripping. So the two have to go hand in hand, really. You can't have one without the other. A bit like deer, similar thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone's been looking at the whole maps of the UK that you've been showing, and they were just wanting to confirm, is the Isle of Wight really grey squirrel free?
Yes, it is. Yeah, the Isle of Wight is grey squirrel free. One of the only areas. There are little pockets of red squirrels in England, as we say, about 20% of the UK's population. But the Isle of Wight is grey squirrel free, and as I understand it, from various kind of friends, family members that are down that way, if grey squirrels do accidentally come over on one of the ferries, they're very quickly dispatched to protect that red squirrel population. So if you're in the south of England and you think, I'm never going to see one, go over to the Isle of Wight for the day or for the weekend, and you can find them there. Yeah.
Right. And I think a couple of questions around contraception and birth control, and because are you using birth control as they're trying in Cumbria? Just as a question.
Yeah, so at the moment, the birth control has not been licensed yet, so it's not possible to use it. So this is something that is in development and is being researched by a team of scientists, mainly in England, to introduce a grey squirrel contraceptive to stop them from breeding. But at the moment, it's not been licensed yet. So there are tests and trials being carried out, not of the contraceptive itself, but of the way in which it would be administered. So this is also very important, is how can you make sure that it's only given to grey squirrels and not given to reds? So people are testing out the way that it's administered at the moment, i.e. like if you use a certain weighted hopper, they call it, does that exclude all red squirrels or not? But they're not actually using the contraceptive itself yet, because this has not been licensed for use in the wild yet. But this is in the works, but we expect maybe a decade. If there are any of the folk on here that are developing that, do correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it should be about a decade before it's ready for actual use.
And the next two questions are around the squirrel pox again, like, just and saying, I think it was a question asked while you were speaking, so maybe you've covered it in the talk, but maybe we can go through it again. And it was, how do red squirrels catch squirrel pox, and is it always deadly, or do some squirrels survive?
Yeah, so research has shown that it's about 90 to 95% of reds will die within 2 weeks of catching it. And the main way that it's spread is through coming into close contact with each other. And that is usually in places of feeding. So this is why cleaning of feeders is so important, just in case you have both species using the same feeder, for example.
Right. A question again, like, how often are red squirrels now seen in Aberdeen? I think your map illustrates that, but maybe you could speak to it a little bit more. And how do people feel, like, possibly you could give an insight of, like, people seeing
Sure.
this shift of saying we once had greys and now we have reds,
now we have
or
reds.
possibly
Yeah. Well, I think people are really excited and happy to see reds return to Aberdeen. I know that for lots of people, actually, because the greys were introduced there much later, they have memories. Lots of folks still have memories of red squirrels in the city from kind of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so to that memory of knowing that red squirrels were present and that they could be present has really meant that there's a strong level of support for the work that we're doing in that part of Scotland. Yeah, we recently published a blog with lots of folk writing into us about where they'd seen them and why they enjoy seeing them in different parts of the city. So yeah, I think it is very exciting. And yeah, I think it's just proof that red squirrels can survive in urban environments and thrive in urban environments if they're given the opportunity.
You mentioned there's a couple of questions. One is directly linked to your talk, the other one not so much, and you might not know the answer of that one. But the first one is around the two other invasive species that you discussed, the North American mink, and the question is around do they have an effect on the red squirrel populations? And the other one is, if people see Himalayan balsam, what should they do? Or
what should they do?
So what can they, who could they alert? Or
yeah. So I'll answer the first one first. The second question first, actually. So there is a project called the Scottish Invasive Species Initiative, shortened to CC, and they are working within key areas in Scotland. They have project areas a bit like ours to control invasive plant species, and they also do American mink control as well. So you can get in touch with them, and they should have the answer for you. I don't know where you are, but yeah, they should be able to answer for you anyway on where to report that and how to report that. And then the first question about American mink and red squirrels, I'm not aware that they have particular interaction. American mink are very much water species, and red squirrels are often higher up in the canopy. In fact, red squirrels don't really drink. They get pretty much all of their moisture that they need from their natural food sources and from things like moss. So it's only really in the summer months that you might see them drinking. So yeah, it's I'm not aware that they have any particular interaction in the wild with each other.
and some people wonder if there are natural methods of reducing grey numbers into native predators to places where it would make a difference, possibly. And linked to that, potentially, the second question is, maybe leading you in some ways, but first question is, are there any natural methods of reducing greys? And so do pine martens affect red squirrels as well as grey squirrels? Because I think that you talked to that in the introduction, but didn't really cover it too much in the talk.
Yes, that's true, actually. Yeah. No, thanks for that. And yes, I was thinking that maybe I need to put in a little bit more pine marten information in to this talk at some point. But yes, so you're right, there is natural ways of controlling grey squirrels, and that is largely through pine martens. So pine martens have been, as some people may know, expanding and recovering in Scotland in recent years. And we're seeing sightings of them now in Fife, in lots of parts of the central lowlands, whereas before they were only seen in remoter parts of the Scottish Highlands, which is fantastic news, and sighted in Aberdeenshire as well. And recovery in Dumfries and Galloway and in the Scottish borders, and there's great work being done by the Vincent Wildlife Trust and others in those areas to encourage and help that pine marten population recover. And there's been lots of research done which shows that pine martens have a positive effect on red squirrels, and that is because they predate more upon greys than they do upon reds. And we think that that is probably because reds don't recognize them as a predator. Greys don't recognize them as a predator because they haven't evolved together. So their greys are far less likely to kind of smell pine marten about and run for safety. So they're easier to catch in very simplistic terms. And red squirrels as well are much smaller than the grey squirrels, so they can get to kind of like much lighter branches on trees and things like that. There's a great article written by Emma Sheehy, who is an ex-member of staff of the project. It's called "The Enemy of My Enemy is My Friend," and if you just Google that, you can find it, and that details some of this really key research that's been done. A lot of it's been done in Ireland, where the pine marten recovery happened a bit earlier there than it has in Scotland. What I would say about it is that it's definitely going to be an important part of the puzzle. But if we left things and didn't do anything, pine marten populations haven't recovered enough yet to stop incursion of grey squirrels northwards into the Highlands. So, or to further decimate those populations in the south of Scotland. So this is why kind of human-led control has to carry on at the same time. Because the pine marten populations aren't extensive enough at the moment, but they definitely are an important part of that work that's being done.
There's still quite a few questions coming in. I still got the energy to keep going.
Yeah,
Katie?
go for it. Yeah,
we'll try and cover a few more, and then we'll bring this evening to a conclusion.
Yeah.
But thanks very much for all your great answers.
No problem.
Is there pharmacological research going on to inoculate reds from pox?
Yeah, well, there was definitely, but I'm aware that funding for that currently has halted. So a squirrel pox vaccine was in the works, and there was some research being done, but at the moment, I believe that there is not enough funding currently to carry on that work. But you can definitely, if you have a little Google, you'll be able to find what the latest updates on that. But at the moment, I think there's been a slight stalling. Yeah.
An easy one. Please remind us the name of the cleaning solution you recommend for feeding boxes. For cleaning feeding boxes, and can this be used on bird feeders too?
Yep. So it's called Virkon S, Virkon, and if you can use it on bird feeders, squirrel feeders, and if you go onto our website, on our publications page, we have kind of a guide on how to use it when cleaning your feeders. So we hope that's helpful for folk. But yeah, you can buy that online, and we generally tend to buy it in a tablet form, which we then distill. So you can do that.
I think a follow-on question was the pine marten, like, just that strategy. I think again that proved to be successful in Ireland, and is it something that is planned for Scotland too, or just?
Yeah, well, definitely we hope so. Yeah, so it's great to see conservation work being undertaken by people like the Vincent Wildlife Trust to encourage those populations. So yeah, we watch it with great interest, and it's always brilliant to hear of pine marten sightings that people have had. Definitely, as a child, I spent a lot of time on the west coast of Scotland, where my grandparents were based for part of the time. And at that time, I remember that pine martens we had them in our attic, and we'd see them when we were out and about, but that they were really very much part of that part of Scotland only. So it's incredible to see, this shows my age, but that in, the 30 years since, that pine martens are now, being detected all over the central lowlands and Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders. So yeah, we really hope that is part of the solution. But yeah, as I say, that doesn't mean that we can step back from the work that we're doing, because we don't know how, to what extent they'll recover in time. So yeah, that's why we've got to carry on doing the work we're doing. But it is great to see their recovery for red squirrels, but also for general biodiversity in Scotland.
Yeah, I remember the news, the recent news around the conflict they had between the pine marten recovery and the capercaillies and the cairngorms also,
Yeah.
and the kind of strategies they were trying to adopt to protect both of those species.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
let's keep focus. Is there any movement yet on getting on areas such as Scone Palace where greys are widespread to address this anomaly? Yeah, just
Yeah, so I mean, we would love to work further south within Tayside and into areas down into Perth and places like that. This is something that we'd really love to do. At the moment, we don't have enough funding for it, and we know that if we pulled back from our efforts on the Highland Boundary Fault Line, which is just a bit further north, that that grey squirrels would start incurring into the Highlands. So our priority at the moment is to stop grey squirrels from moving further north. But in time and with the right amount of funding and with the right amount of support, we would like to start working further south within Tayside. This is something that I can't promise, but it's definitely something that we want to do. And we recognise that there are big grey squirrel populations in those areas. I can't speak specifically about Scone Palace. That would depend on all sorts of things, but we know that there are large grey squirrel populations in places like that, and that they are moving north, and it makes our work very difficult because we're always kind of having to combat that. So we would like to move further southwards in time. Yeah.
I'll ask around. Someone's asking a little bit more detail about your removal procedures, and can I add a question of my own? And you know, during the COVID lockdown, there were restrictions in our movements, and how did that affect any of your field work? Because you can't get out or something like that. But anyway, removal procedures and the possible impact of the COVID. Yeah, just
absolutely. So our removal procedures. So we train all of our staff and any volunteers who are controlling grey squirrels to a very high standard, and we have a very strict operating procedures protocol that's been developed with kind of animal welfare regulations at very top in mind. So we do this through live dispatch. So this is live trapping in live capture traps that are then checked twice a day. And any bycatch, so anything that's not a grey squirrel or an invasive species, is set free. And anything that's not is killed by a humane dispatch. And this is either through cranial concussion or sometimes through shooting with an air weapon. So that's how we do it. But I would say that it has been deemed the most humane way possible, and that nobody is taking joy out of doing it. And we recognise that it's a very difficult thing, and that some people won't always necessarily agree. But the reason that we're doing it is to protect our biodiversity of our native woodlands and of red squirrels, and that we're only doing it in areas where we know that we're having a positive impact. But yeah, we have a very strict training protocol for all staff and all volunteers who are carrying out that work. But yeah, we never use kill traps. We only use live traps, and they are checked twice a day. The legal requirement is to check them once a day, but we will go and check them twice a day. So this is why it's actually very it takes a lot of resources to carry out this work. It's because a staff member has to go to every single trap twice a day to check it, so which takes a lot of time. So yeah, that's how we carry it out. And then the second question around COVID, yes, this did greatly impact the project. As you mentioned in your introduction, I actually joined the project 2 weeks before COVID started, so it was a very interesting way of starting a job. And it meant that a lot of our grey squirrel control officers, so that's our field staff who are out carrying out that work, were kept from working for about 3 or 4 months, from about March of 2020 to kind of July of 2020. And we saw in that period of time a big increase in the grey squirrel populations because we weren't carrying out that work. Which then meant we had to really catch up afterwards. So it happened so quickly, and this is the nature of invasive species, that it's not their fault, excuse me, but you know, they are invasive. They spread very, very quickly, and anybody that you know has rhododendron on their doorstep, if you're on the west coast of Scotland, for example, you'll know that about it, that you kind of kind of cut it back, and then it immediately is growing again. So it's a similar nature with grey squirrels. But after a period of time, we got an agreement with partners, including Scottish Government and statutory agencies, that those grey squirrel control officers could go out and carry out their work. So it was only about 4 months in 2020 that was impacted.
I'll ask 2 more questions and then we'll call it a
Sure.
night.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
so which one should it be? The pressure. I think there are a few more around, like some repeats around the pine marten and red squirrel. One from natural history. Are the alarm calls of the 2 species distinctive? Do you know that?
Oh yeah,
Or-
no, that's really interesting. So yes, they are. And I think it's very difficult as a human to detect that. But there's been some technology recently that's been developed that can detect the difference between the two. And we're potentially going to look into acquiring some of that technology. It's some kind of like recording device that then I think some kind of program within it that can then detect what the difference is, and that can help you tell which species is maybe present within each woodland. So there is a way of doing it through that, but I think to the human ear, it's very difficult to tell the difference. Yeah.
Cool,
Yeah.
great. And our last question, because there's still quite a few more, but I think we have to, at one point end the evening. And it's around these, perhaps a bigger theme is anyone gunning or supporting the greys, like and wanting them to stay and wanting them because they've attached as they've been introduced, and linked to that, as I guess a few people spotted on the maps that they've been introduced on many islands, on Loch Lomond Islands, for example, but also on Arran. I think they've been introduced, and were greys, and were that always deliberate? So were these introductions on islands always deliberate?
So yeah, Arran is red squirrel only, so there are no grey squirrels on Arran. The Loch Lomond Islands, they will have swum to, so it's not a human introduction. Grey squirrels and red squirrels can swim, so that's how they've got to some of those Loch Lomond Islands, which are very close to the shore. If you're familiar with that area of Scotland, it's all very, very small and close together. We are aware that there are potentially some illegal releases occurring, and we keep very close eye on that. And if that is the case, then we report it to Police Scotland, because that is not legal. And we would advise anybody else to do the same thing. So if you're aware of anybody carrying out an illegal activity to release grey squirrels, it's illegal wherever you are in the UK. So do report that to your local police, because it is a wildlife crime. Lots of police areas will have specific wildlife and crime officers that will deal with wildlife crime in particular. So it's best to ask for them, so that you can direct it to the best resources. And yeah, we're aware that people might not agree. It is a very difficult thing. It's not easy. And I hope that through the talk today, we've helped to explain, or I've helped to explain, why we do the work that we do, and why it's really important. But we fully recognise that not everybody will agree. And in certain places, it's going to be very difficult for red squirrels to recover. So this is why we're not working in places like Edinburgh, which is where I'm sat right now, joining you from. We're not working here because we know that red squirrels are very unlikely to recover in Edinburgh anytime soon. And so we're really only working in places where we know that we're going to have this positive impact on reds. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking to folk and they don't understand why, I think my general attitude is to kind of come to that with understanding. Like, I get why it's really hard for people, but then if you can help explain in a kind of gentle and reasonable way why, then hopefully that helps to educate folk. And sometimes it's just because people don't know, or they just don't realise the impact that they're having. Things like squirrel pox will kill a squirrel within 2 weeks, but it's a long, protracted process and very painful for red squirrels, obviously, to go through. The humane dispatch that we carry out takes 5 minutes, or less than. So it's a very quick process by comparison. So sometimes just explaining things like that can help for folk to realise why. But we understand that not everybody will agree all the time.
Thank you again, Katie. I
That's
think
okay.
the people in the chats are leaving very many well-deserved and complimentary
Oh,
messages for
nice.
you, and it's been a great talk. It's been really inspiring. I think, and I do find, like, just I like the sense of, like, seeing the encouraging message that also that brings that you brought alongside the work that you're trying to do,
Yeah.
despite the there's certain the greys are still here, and someone very well established, but your work seems to be proving to be effective, so that's really really encouraging. So thank you very much. Thanks
That's
very
okay.
much to everyone for joining us tonight. It's been great having you here. You can find more information on the website, scottishsquirrels.org.uk, if you want to hear more about this. And the Lothians Group tries to organise some winter talks monthly over the winter months. And our next one is in person, is actually in person. And again, it's going to be on another mammal species, but these times the bats of Scotland. And that will be an in-person conversation that takes place in the Cornerstone Centre at the intersection between Lothians Road and Princess Street. So I really hope that we can, if you're local to Edinburgh, I really hope that we meet you then, and have a very nice evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.